In the last video, we painted a Night Lord for no other reason but for it to purely exist. Because getting stuck in the never-ending YouTube loop of tabletop or display is kind of a drag. But sometimes there is actually a purpose for these models and the time that we put into it. This is one of those times. For the 37th time this year, I've convinced myself that I'm going to start playing Kill Team. Again. And of course, none of the other kill teams that I've already painted are going to do, so we're going to need a new one. And this is actually where that Night Lord video comes back in. Because there was zero stress, we got a $5 look from a $2 investment. So now we're going to take the exact same process and make the exact same video as we did last week, and apply it to a test model for a new kill team of 1,000 Daughters. Which means that we're going to need something that doesn't yet exist. There are quite a few people out there that would go full chud over this, but the pun alone is worth going down the gender-bent Thousand Sun route. And even though the original intention was just to put a Space Marine and a Stormcast together to make some kind of Space Knight, I fell upwards into the idea and just ran with it, like literally everything else on the channel. It also means we get to visit my first love of the hobby, which was kitbashing. I've only recently became a competent enough painter to do the weird and wonderful things, and before that I got creative by just smashing plastic together. Granted, this can be a rather costly exercise if you're taking two different kits to make one thing, but one, we play Warhammer so we're used to selling kidneys anyway, and two, after you've been in the hobby for a little while and you kind of amass a few different kits and a few bits and pieces from a bunch of different places, you do tend to end up with a variety of spare bits. A kitbash doesn't have to be wildly aesthetic breaking, it's just a couple of things from a couple of different places that look good together. And then of course you get the real gratification by priming it and seeing if it actually turns out looking like something that was always meant to be. And now the paint won't peel like a $14 million pool. So what are the actual goals here? Number one, somewhat of a unique aesthetic. We can basically check that off because we've got 1,000 Daughters. Number two, battle ready, that's really just a 3-color minimum and basing. Since it's based on the Dusty Legion, 2 of those will be blue and gold, and since we're here, the third one's going to be pink, but we'll make that fancy. Next on the list, something replicatable. This is going on like 10 different models. It just means that we don't want to get 3 knuckles deep into needing to refine everything. And finally, a decent outcome for a gaming miniature. Gaming minis are going to have your grubby hands all over them, dice rolled into them, and honestly probably thrown when you fail a save roll. We want it to look good on the table, but not so good that we're scared to touch it. But to be honest, all of these things can kind of just be rolled into one. Painted. These lists are fucking stupid. Gather round, nerds, because 3 minutes in we're actually going to paint something. And the useful part of this video is we're going to start with OSL and how it actually works. Those little white splodges are our light source. This is going to be the brightest part. And as it starts radiating out, this is where we're going to get our coloured glow from. But the further away we get from our light source, that glow is going to start to fade. But before it's completely gone, there's reflective points that start touching our model. Because we have a lot of pinks and blues coming in, I'm basing everything with a Terrestrial Titan, which is a deep purple. 035, 0365. Even though we just went through all of those steps starting from the light source, we actually have to paint it backwards. So for the initial contact, we're starting with the faded glow. The real key here is using those little white splodges as a pivot point, because that's our light source, that's where the light's coming from. So we're going to use that to determine the angles that we're spraying. And that same idea continues all the way through, even though now we're into Wicked Pink, which is our glow. This also means that every time we get brighter, we want to pull back and cover a little bit less area, but more concentrated around where the light source is. Last squirt goes on the light. With the pink OSL taking up a decent amount of real estate, by the time you break it all down and segment it by colour, there's really not a lot of open spaces left. So when it comes to the blue armour, we can probably afford to give it some extra love rather than just base coat highlight go. Because all the glow from the OSL has taken up essentially a third of the miniature, we only have 2/3 left to paint. So starting with the darkness, we're going to start covering all the sections that aren't hit by that glow. And because we have a base layer of Terrestrial Titan, we're going to leave that in all the deepest, darkest recesses. After this, when we start jumping to our next colour, this is where we have to make a decision. Because now we need a second light source, which is going to be out of the frame. And this idea is going to determine 2 different factors. One, angle and placement of where the second light source is coming from. This helps us know where to paint the highlights in. And 2, how strong is that secondary light source? This is going to help us figure out how bright we're actually going with the piece overall. Since this is just for the table, I went with a very general mid-level light. and it's coming from roughly the angle that she's looking at. I really didn't go that hard into it. All the paints that you see on the channel are going to be listed. All the paints that you see on the channel are... All the paints that you see in this video are... All the paints that you see in this video are going to be listed in the description, and they're also going to be by the Army Painter, because I'm 9.09% of the Army Painter factory team. And to be fair, I've been using Army Painter for longer than I've been on the factory team anyway. If you're expecting more, it's not going to happen. I'm terrible at ads. Heresy 5. If you're thinking that we've skipped a step and this is a whole lot brighter, you're only half wrong, while also actually being not wrong at all. The thing about thinning paints is that they're thin, so they're a little bit more translucent than they usually are. But there's a lot of people that don't take this into consideration, put a single layer down, and then kind of move on. Yes, you have successfully applied a layer that's brighter than the last, but adding another layer of the exact same color at the exact same opacity is actually going to bring it closer to full opacity. We've only just now stepped into Regal Blue, which means everything before this was still that same Imperial Navy. Should you thin your paint? Yes, absolutely. But it does change how the paint reacts, and we have to accommodate that change. While you could absolutely stop here with the blue, I'm going to go a little bit brighter with a step up with some additional highlighting. And it's really just because I can, you don't have to. But you could. But you don't have to. Just do it. After that Regal Blue, I mixed in a little Neptune Glow. Going into a little bit warmer of a turquoise instead of that cold blue gives it a little bit of a hue shift. And this jump is also going to take your eyes off a little bit of the choppiness that we have between the layers. The trick here is that because it's a little bit more intense, we're concentrating on that and not really taking into consideration the quality of the gradient below. We're going to get into some non-metallic metal, which sounds counterintuitive considering the third goal on the list was replicatable. But after the last video painting that Night Lord and figuring out the approach to this weird, scratchy, very low effort non-metallic metal, I'm fairly confident that we're going to be fine. This is what test models are for. Help. Now, again, we're only really getting away with being able to spend this much extra time on other details because of that initial OSL glow. That, and we're getting away with a lower quality because it's for the table, which is going to be 6 foot away. The other added time saver bonus, and this is probably only a little bit more applicable for this specific kitbash, is because it is a kitbash. Now, generally we start to think of Thousand Suns and it's just 8 days of trim. And on the official models, a lot of that trim is very heavy around the torso and legs, which are not a thing here. And to keep piling on to the exact same idea, because the trim isn't as heavy down the bottom, I'm going to be a little bit more selective of the trim that I paint on the top. We still want to keep somewhat of a balance, so if we go all in 3 knuckles deep on all the actual trim that we do have, it's going to be very top heavy. And since we're already into the second color, we should probably go over paints. That first layer was Camo Brown, and that was the longer step because it had to cover more area. In saying that, that first layer was also as sketchy as a used car salesman. We've left a lot of those base colors showing through underneath it. Don't worry, this is on purpose, stylistic choice. And because none of this model is focused on blending, we've jumped straight into Sunburnt Ocher from there, covering even less of what we covered with the Camo Brown, which wasn't that much to start with. Even though we're only halfway through the non-metallic metal, yes, this is really only halfway through, it's actually no more trouble than the blue armor was. It's the same idea, same technique, different color. Getting into the initial highlights, this is where it actually starts to make a little bit more sense. Color-wise, this is just Sunburnt Ocher with a little bit of ice yellow mixed in. But the real magic comes from the application. If you remember all the way back to when we were doing the blue armor and had to make that secondary decision of where that secondary light source was coming from, and that's kind of where we painted the highlights of the blue too, we're going to reinforce that idea with the non-metallic metal gold. So all the highlights are going to be facing that exact same direction. This kind of coherency in light effect placement is actually what makes it feel like it's actually doing something. Not that you can really tell, but I have added some counter reflections in here just with the placement, but it's really here nor there with how rough and ready this style is. And yes, this is a style, it's not just me being completely shit. It's actually very loosely based on the application of watercolors, leaving all those layer lines and tide marks while still effectively getting a pretty decent outcome. Also, we're into ice yellow now, and this is doing the exact same trick as the Neptune Glow did for the blue armor.
The sharp jump in intensity with all these spectral highlights, 1 is going to push the idea of direction of light, but 2, it's also so intense that we're not really paying attention to the gradient under it. Because let's be real, there is no fucking gradient here. Slap metal.
Remember when we were going through the OSL and glow steps, and the last step was painting all the reflective points? There's actually a reason that we skipped it all the way back then. And it's because I was waiting for all the blue and gold to be done. And by saving this step until everything else was finished, we can actually spill over some of those boundaries and make it all a little bit more cohesive and tie in. Yeah, let's go with that. But seriously, it was that.
Again, this is going to do 2 things for us. 1, this is going to re-establish the angle of that light source. And 2, because the OSL application is so smooth and the rest of the model is just fucking not, getting a few visible brush strokes and layer lines in there is actually going to help the coherency of everything else. And while this isn't a massive step of application because it's fairly easy, it does do a lot of heavy lifting to making it actually feel like a single piece. And we're just using the exact same colors as before. That first reinforcement was the wicked pink going across all the big armor panels, and now we're back into the Pixie Pink, just picking out the highlights. And as a slight third advantage, it's actually also going to help us out with readability, because we're coming in and actually getting some detail separation in there. The airbrush cares not for detail, it's just there to unload.
So we're actually making some pretty good time here. As far as brush to model tracking kind of goes, we're looking at about an hour in. So I'm just going to throw in some interference colors to make it pop.
Take that time count with a pinch of salt. I've painted 8 to 10 hours every single day for the last 4 years. And this is a low poly version of how I would typically paint. There are definitely stronger painters out there that would get a better result than this faster. All that's actually going on right now is it's a little bit of white paint and a little bit of medium just to make it a little bit more flowy, which honestly could have been more flowy than it came out, and then some green fluorescent paint just to make everything pop. Don't be too concerned with all the overspill of the white. By the time the green goes on, it's just going to look like a glow effect. Hopefully. Could we have done more? Absolutely. Am I going to? Undecided. But as it stands, since this exists for me to pretend that I actually have a social life, it's good enough. The only trophy that this is going to win me is guy who flipped the most tables. And don't worry, it'll probably be my table with my terrain. Catch you in the next video when we cover how to fix an entire table's worth of Kill Team terrain. As always, a massive thank you to the Army Painter and the best Patreon members in the world. Big love, you filthy heretics.